Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be utilizing a build that's been around for quite some time, but only until this season with introductions of new elemental well mods has it really become arguably one of the most viable builds in terms of just pure damage and also ease of use. There really isn't anything too complicated going on here. A lot of the potency of this build just simply depends on how many enemies are near you. Without further ado, let's jump right into the video. So starting off, we're going to be using bottom tree Striker Titan, and we're going to be relying on a few different things working with us here. The first is frontal assault, which basically hitting an enemy increases your weapon damage, your weapon stability, and your reload, which is all a very nice effect, but we're not actually going to be shooting with this build that much. So we're mainly going to be taking advantage of reversal, which those melee kills immediately trigger health regeneration, as well as knockout, which whenever you critically wound an enemy so that they're about below half health, your melee range and damage actually increase. And the cool thing about this is whenever it's triggered, you have it for 5 seconds until you get a melee kill, which then refreshes it. And then this can chain and go on and on and on, ultimately increasing your melee damage throughout the entirety of this whole chain. And then of course trample, which is always good if you're in your super, which is something we are also going to be taking advantage of. But jumping into the mods and how this whole thing works, we're aiming to get Wormgod Caress's ×5 Burning Fist, which gives us a huge jump in damage increase for our melee ability, and we're going to be building off of it as much as we can with different mods, especially from ones from this season. So starting off with Wormgod Caress, the exotic reads melee kills increase melee damage for a period of time. Additional kills extend duration and increase effects. Essentially, whenever you get a melee kill, you're going to get a certain buff in damage that lasts for 5 seconds. And this buff can be multiplied to ×5. And again, you have 5 seconds to get a melee kill. And honestly, after one, it's incredibly easy to get basically anything outside of a mini boss or a boss dead with one hit. And now the goal of this would normally be, alright, we'll basically have something for boss damage because you're not really going to be melting bosses with this outside of a few glitches that occasionally come out throughout the seasons. My goal was to take this and say, no, we'll kill a boss in one hit, and that's exactly what we're doing with this. So utilizing a mod on our gauntlets first is Elemental Charge. Basically, you become charged with light by picking up an elemental well, and if that matches your subclass, you get 2 stacks of charge with light. And we're going to be playing this onto a few different other mods that we're using. So first thing is our helmet. Our helmet is going to have Well of Ions on it. You do need an arc type helmet for this. And basically what it means is picking up an arc elemental well causes your next melee to deal increased damage. And I'll actually break down some of the numbers from testing that I've done and show some background gameplay footage showcasing this as well. Whenever you pick up an arc elemental well, your next melee, which in this buff will last for 10 seconds, so you do have to get it relatively quickly, it'll do increased damage, and it's actually a very substantial amount. Again, I'll get into specific values in a bit. But how are we actually going to be able to get these elemental wells efficiently? And the first thing we're actually going to be doing is Overload Wellmaker. And essentially defeating a combatant with a finisher spawns 2 arc elemental wells. And what this is going to basically do is allow us to have that immediate damage bonus present whenever we initially start or even partway through our comboing with Wormgod Caress and our melee kills. And again, this only applies to one, so if you want to get the most out of it in terms of just raw damage, say save it for a boss for example, do a finisher. Typically you'll collect one well and the other one will be there, or you'll just miss both and both wells will be there. And while you're chaining your melee, run back through, grab that well, and then run to the boss. And again, this only works for one. Even though the buff lasts for 10 seconds, as soon as you hit someone with it, whether or not they die from it, that buff goes away. So you do have to do some planning around this, but again, Wormgod itself is so potent that any minors or even some majors potentially are going to die just from the exotic alone, and this just kind of really increases the potency, combining that with Well of Ions. Moving on to our next armor piece is actually Protective Light. One of the biggest things I noticed when testing this is in higher end content it really struggled, because while you do get that health regeneration from your melee ability, and while Wormgod is doing a lot of damage when you actually get chains, it's hard to actually plan around properly, because in stuff like Lost Sectors that are 1340 or Master difficulty in Nightfalls or in Empire Hunts, a lot of stuff can kill you in one hit. And the biggest thing with this build is you are right there in front of people. you aren't far away hitting them with a heavy weapon or a special weapon. You are literally within punching distance constantly, and due to the only 5-second timer on Wormgod, you need to be in everyone's face all the time. And so what this does is we're going to be taking advantage of getting charged with light from our finisher, which in turn buffs our melee and also charges us with light in order to have protective light. And essentially what this does is you have significant damage resistance when your shields are destroyed. So that's why you might be wondering, well, why are we only rocking like 37 resilience? Resilience doesn't increase your health, it only increases your shield. And honestly, it doesn't increase it by that much. So we don't want to invest in resilience. Recovery is basically irrelevant because every time we get a melee kill, we're instantly going to start recovering our health. So we want to have our melee ability as high as we can, and also our mobility as high as we can, so we can run in between enemies very, very quickly. But essentially, whenever our shields are down and we actually utilize protective light, we get a significant damage reduction, which allows us to keep that chain going. I will say the more stacks of light that you have whenever this procs, the longer it lasts, but the potency or reduction percentage does not change. So if you want to rock like something like supercharge and try to get a little more charges with light going and then use this, you totally can, but realistically it's not going to increase your survivability, just the duration of that. And then the final one that we're actually going to be using is Breach and Clear. This is something that I actually still use with my God of Thunder build that I put on my channel a couple months ago, and it's something I'm utilizing here in form of a debuff for our enemies. Again, this is mainly for bosses and even mini bosses, where even though you're doing a lot of damage with that melee, having that 30% debuff, especially with something like Anarchy, where it's a long time, you can put that Anarchy on that boss, start chaining adds, and then run to that boss and hit him. That'll take care of that debuff for you. You don't even have to worry about anything else. Plus, it's a good damage over time. Overall, just increasing the potency of this, and I'm combining it with Elemental Light, where defeating an enemy with your super allows you to have Elemental Well spawn that match your energy type, and again, you pick those up after you add your super. You then have that increased melee damage for 10 seconds on the first hit, so it really helps you kind of get that first hit off and guarantee that kill, because this, again, whenever you're in like high-end Legend Lost sectors, master level content, that first hit isn't always going to be a one-shot, so this is really helpful when you're coming out of your super. It allows you to get that extra damage off and then start chaining Burning Fist, and at that point you're one-shotting basically everything outside of a champion. Moving on to our weapons, and this is actually something where I am recommending 2 exact weapons, and I recommend that you do not stray away from them. Your kinetic weapon, whatever your primary is, do whatever you want. You want to use a 7th Seraph weapon, go for it. You want to use an SMG like I am, go for it. I'm using my Extraordinary Rendition. It's just a very good SMG. In my opinion, I really like using it, but you can use anything you want. The other two, though, I am going to be showing this off. The first is the Found Verdict, which is the new Vault of Glass shotgun returning to us in D2, and it can actually roll with 1-2 punch. This is one of the only 2 shotguns currently not sunset in the game that can roll with 1-2 punch. All other perks on this weapon do not matter for this build. I personally have Slide Shot. It has a stability masterwork, accurized, barrel shroud, whatever. You only need this. That is all you need. So if you do the raid and you end up with a Found Verdict and it's got 1-2 punch on it, save it, because this build is absolutely disgusting. And I'll show you how potent this actually can be. And then finally, we're using Anarchy. Again, we're combining it with Breach and Clear to enable us to have our own 30% debuff. And this enables us to, again, have a lot more damage coming out of this melee combo. So let's break a few things down now. How much damage are we exactly doing? Well, I've actually run some tests and you can see them running in the background. Let's break this down. So at a base, your melee is doing about 7,135 damage. Nothing too crazy, and it's fairly standard across the board. Now, whenever you incorporate Knockout into this, which again gives us increased melee range and also damage, it bumps it up to 11,415 damage. That's a 60% increase from the base standard. Now, whenever you combine it with Burning Fist and then also with Knockout, because you're going to be basically every time you get a melee hit or melee kill, it's going to proc. At ×1, it's 21,118, then to 30,000, 55,000, 70,000, and then at Burning Fist ×5 with Knockout, you're hitting for 85,613 damage, which is a 1,100% increase from your base damage, which on its own is absolutely insane. But we're not done with looking back for Well of Ions. Again, that's that 10-sec buff that you have to actually get a melee hit that initially has more damage to it, procs at 14,000, which is just over double your base melee damage. Now, this actually does stack with it, so it's going to bump up our damage quite a bit. So let's also look at 1-2 punch on your shotgun. So I tested it. 1-2 punch plus knockout plus burning fist times 5 deals 214,000 damage. That's a 2,900% increase, and we're not even done. We're going to be combining 1-2 punch plus knockout plus Well of Ions while burning fist times 5, and we're going to be hitting for 383,558 damage. Just as a reference, thundercrash combined with breach and clear, which is a 30% debuff, only hits for 192,000 compared to this. But we're not even done yet. Again, that breach and clear is a 30% debuff. We're combining that with 1-2 punch on our shotgun, with knockout, with burning fist times 5, with Well of Ions, and again, breach and clear. We are hitting for 498,626 damage, which is just shy of a 7,000% increase from our base damage. I am not kidding whenever I tell you that this is overkill. For anything outside of legend content, this will basically one-shot it. I have one-shot strike bosses with arc burn on. It's ridiculous. Now, I will say the biggest hindrance with this build is the 5-second timer on Wormgod. This is actually where I would recommend, if you have a hunter with Liar's Handshake and Combination Blow, that you give this a try. And I think they're actually more potent with this because the timer on that is much longer and it can be refreshed with your ability. While with Wormgod, you have to get a melee kill. So it does struggle in areas where it's just a single target, there's not many ads, but in boss fights where a lot of ads will spawn, or if you're in somewhere where there's a whole wave of ads coming at you and there's like a champion in legend content, for example, this is something that will one-shot champions. I did a 1340 Lost Sector today, and I one-shot an overload champion from full health and almost killed the boss in one punch. It is absolutely ridiculous. It is absolutely insane and is genuinely overkill, so you don't even need to really trigger everything. You can honestly just run Wormgod Caress and one-shot 90% of stuff in all activities in the game. And those 10% where it's a lot higher difficulty, enemies are a lot more tanky and can hit a lot harder, everything else such as the 1-2 punch on our shotgun, such as breach and clear, debuffing enemies, Well of Ions, increasing our base damage for that one punch. It all just kind of helps with that. But again, this is one of the most potent builds I think I've ever created, and honestly, we're doing over 2 times the damage of a thundercrash with a breach and clear debuff. We're doing over 2 times that damage with one punch. It's absolutely insane. In my opinion, is this the most potent build? No, and again, it does struggle with areas where there's only one major health target because there's really no good way to start chaining that melee damage. But if you're in an area with a lot of ads and you have a lot of potential to actually build that up over time, as you can see in some of the background gameplay I'm supplementing with this, it's disgusting. You're basically nigh unkillable. You have the strongest melee damage in the game, which again is more than double one of the highest burst damage supers, period. And you're your own walking debuff as well. This build is absolutely crazy. If you ever have Strike Day that you're running with friends and you have Arc Burn and you have Brawler on, use this. You will literally one-shot everything in the game. Use this in higher end content if you're kind of struggling with a solo build, as again, outside of a boss or a unstoppable champion, this is going to one-shot them pretty much every single time. So yeah, be sure to give this a try. If you like what you see here, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more content like this. I'm really excited to bring you more builds like this in the future, especially with new seasons and new mods coming out. But be sure to tell me what you think down below. If you have any recommendations for builds on Titan, any recommendations for builds in general, and any content you'd like to see on this channel. But thanks you guys for watching. Have a great day.
Thank you.